Hey, welcome to another episode of the Gig Harbor Flycast. And today I have Brian Bennett from Moldy Chum with us again. It's been a while though.
We're back.
We're back, and we thought we'd start this. We're recording here on Coronation Day, and so to celebrate the new King of England, we are going to. We're going to drink some Travelers rum from Belize, and this is a 5-year aged rum. So remember, Belize used to be British Honduras, and then they got their independence from the Brits. And since we have our independence from the Brits, we're going to celebrate.
It's long live the Queen. What do they do for the King?
Isn't it just long live the King?
Is it long live the King now? Okay.
Is that enough for you?
Charles? That's perfect. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, here's to independence.
Yeah, here's independence, freedom, and no taxation.
Oh, representation. You go throw some tea and the sound here when I leave. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What's going on? What have you been doing since we said the last time?
This isn't really as good as you kind of would expect it to be. But it doubles as rubbing alcohol, which is
not bad. It's actually not bad.
But the problem is that it's not good.
It's a 5-year.
Right.
It tastes like a 5-year.
Well, and I had some.
It's got a little nice on the front end. I don't know what that is. The finish isn't very good.
No, it's not. It's kind of like a little bit spicy, a little hot.
Yeah, a little. Yeah. Kind of like.
Yeah, I have a couple Cuban rums downstairs, but I couldn't really think of a way to tie that into the whole coronation thing.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Right? So,
yeah.
Okay, well, it is what it is. But look at this. The glasses, they're the Crown Royal glasses, right? So that was like the little crown at the bottom. So I didn't even really plan that. I pulled them out of the cupboard and I'm like, oh, well, I'll be like, we'll do that. So yeah, what's new? My goodness, I got lots of things new. I'm curious about what's new with you too. But one, we just closed on a house out in Forks, and
amazing,
super stoked on that. Was just showing you the pictures of that, and so we're excited to have a new base camp for all sorts of fun fishing stuff. So we'll be hosting clients out there, and
beautiful place.
Yeah, I love it out there.
It's pretty magical.
Yeah. The surprising thing is that for, you have the Olympic National Park, which is super rad, like the whole, and it's not just in the middle of the peninsula, what people think it is. The Olympic National Park, you also have the whole coastal area. Like a lot of the beach is actually in the park.
Yep.
And it's just, I was actually talking to someone recently, and they had been out there, and they're like, I just wish there were that there was more along the coast to do, like more development. And I kind of just chuckle. I'm like, there's development across every coast. Yeah, everywhere. I'm like, let's just have one stretch where there's not, development. So
Camp Pendleton. Last one undeveloped area of the Southern California coast. Right.
Yeah.
So peninsula. Let's hope it stays that way.
Yeah. So, but because there's so much logging out there, so much timber company land, there's not as many like hiking trails, and there's not as much just like outdoor kind of recreation that you would think, other than beaches and rivers. Those kind of the deal.
Yeah, and that hiking thing is usually you're walking up a river drainage, right? And it's beautiful, but then you hit the mountains and it's like straight up.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that Ho trail is really nice. Before I fished, I hiked it a bunch, but now I realize what I was missing before. But
yeah, I haven't really gone up the Ho past the visitor center. I've done like there's a loop up there that I've done, but haven't really hiked back into the park in any significant distance.
Yeah, it's pretty spectacular. We took a helicopter ride on the other side of the Olympics, and actually landed on a spot and checked out a bunch of stuff on that side, and
that's a great idea. I should do that. We have the Gig Harbor Fly Shop helicopter.
It was a unique thing. It was really interesting. We actually dropped down onto the, I don't know if it was the Dosi or one of the rivers, like literally landed on a bar and got out and walked around. Yeah, it was super cool. Yeah.
Cool.
We were actually going towards the Cascades, but it was blowing too hard. So the guy goes, "Hey, let's go. Do you mind if we go across?" And we literally went all the way across, flew out, went across at Everett. There were whales. And then we landed. And we landed on this one spot, and you had the full Olympics behind you and all the Seattle on the other side. Like you could see the sound. It's
Wow.
pretty spectacular.
That's awesome.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah, there's
Comet
been-
helicopters.
That's cool. I mean, there's been several times in the last couple of years where I have this new little saying where when something like just spectacular happens, whether like we're in the kayaks and we see whales, or we're on the river and you see like snow-capped peaks and all this other crazy stuff, and it's just like incredibly scenic, or there's just some wild experience. I just kind of turn to my buddies or my clients, and maybe I've even said it to you, and I go, "We live here."
Yeah.
It's clear because it's like you get these experiences, and it's like, wow, it feels like it should be a place that you visit to go have those experiences, but then we live in these places.
We're super lucky. Yeah. And
Yeah.
every time you're out on the Sound, you see something.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Because we could live somewhere else. We could live someplace where that sucks.
Yeah, I've always, so I grew up on the East Coast. My folks are still there. We have a place on Cape Cod. And
That doesn't suck.
well, what's cool about Cape Cod is like when you're there, like I want to live there because it's a place like I want to live somewhere I always feel like I'm on vacation. Right? Like that's one reason you go live somewhere. It's like, oh yeah, okay. You always have that mindset, but
Sure.
you lose a little bit of that here because it's not quite that way, but you're right. Like, and it'll, the classic thing is like it rains for like 30 straight days and you're ready to slit your wrists, and you get that one beautiful day and you drive up on a hill and you see the Cascades on one side, the Olympics on the other, and you just kind of go, wow.
Like we live here.
Yeah, we're super lucky.
Yeah.
Super lucky.
So you've lived in a few places around the country. What was the worst place you've lived? What was not vacation?
I lived in St. Louis for a while.
You didn't like it?
Well, that's where I ended up meeting the woman who ended up becoming my wife. So
there's some redeeming.
there was a bonus there.
St. Louis.
But I lived downtown, and it was back then it was pretty rough.
Okay.
But it had some good things, but there was no real lifestyle there. So yeah, that was probably the worst place. And then we picked up and we moved the company I was working for to Colorado, and that's when I ultimately got into fishing, which was
Yeah.
So and Colorado was awesome. Marie, my wife, who I met in St. Louis, she'd go back there in a minute. She loved it there.
To St. Louis or to
No, to Colorado.
Colorado? Yeah.
But too far from the ocean for me.
Sure.
I want to live. St. Louis was even worse than being from the ocean. Like every direction you looked, you're like 1,500 miles from the ocean. It was tough, but that's why I love being here. Reminds me of the East Coast a lot.
I haven't lived in a lot of different places.
San Diego, right?
Yeah, I was in San Diego, which we were on it was for our undergrad, and we were right on the coast, so
Yeah.
like right on the water, so it didn't suck.
Yeah, Coronado. I spent a lot of time in Coronado.
Yeah, there's bonefish down there.
There are.
Yeah, on Coronado, like there's these sand flats on. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's
Kind of a different variety of bonefish, I believe, but
little guys.
still a bonefish, though.
Yeah, bonefish is bonefish.
Corbina.
Yeah,
Yeah,
California halibut.
that's right. Catch them on the surf.
Yeah, I never caught one of those.
Yeah, I never did the Corbina patrol. There are a lot of guys that I knew that were into the Corbina thing.
Yeah.
Supposedly, it's hard a fish to catch when the fly is a permit.
What?
That's what I hear.
I want to do that. We should do this.
Go down and catch Corbina and San Diego bonefish.
Yeah. It'd be fun.
Yeah, I had a sailboat in San Diego. I had a sailboat in Chula Vista.
Really?
Yeah, 25-foot Coronado. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I learned something new about you every
When
time we hang out.
When I moved to St. Louis, I actually kept it for a year thinking I was ending up going back at some point, which I never went back. So
Yeah.
I ended up selling it. But yeah, the gal I was dating, her mom had a boyfriend who was an ex-admiral in the Navy, retired. I shouldn't say ex-retired. And he had this boat, and he was an older guy. He was in his early 80s, and he couldn't manage it anymore. So he asked me if I wanted it. And I grew up doing a bunch of sailing. I said, yeah, sure. It had been on the slip in the marina, unmoved for like 3 years. This is a great story.
Like sea lions taking up residence.
So we go, and like it's got like growth on it like you can't believe.
Like barnacles and stuff.
Yeah, everything. And so I'm like, whoa. And so it needed a lot of work, but And that was when you used to get those free TV circulars, like at the grocery store, like had the TV listings and all these ads. And there was a little ad in it that it was like, bottom scraping for your boat, $50. So I was like, yeah, call him up. Guy shows up. He kind of looks at it. He jumps in the water. He comes back up. He goes, you're kidding me, right?
He's like, it's $50 per barnacle.
And I go, $50 for the company, $150 for you. And he's like, right on.
Yeah.
Dude scraped it all off and we were good to go.
Do we have to paint it after that though?
Yeah, we pulled it out and edited it, and we had to redo the mast, and yeah, we had a bunch of stuff to do, but it was an awesome boat, and it was great. But yeah,
we had friends that had a sailboat in San Diego when we were living there, and they wanted us to go out sailing with them, and we got cut off by this big huge power yacht deal, and in Mission Bay, right? So they had to drop the sail and try to fire up the engine, the motor, the outboard, and there was like an electrical issue. And so anyways, long story short, they crashed the boat into the rocks and it broke the rudder. And the dude on the big yacht, was just like, he saw the whole thing and he just didn't even care. He just stared at us.
Which says, I mean, technically they have to give you the right of way.
Technically they're supposed to. He either didn't know or didn't care, but it was a little bit of an anxious moment. That was the last time I was on a sailboat, and that was, so that's been 25 years.
I ran a sailboat. I didn't run it aground, but my stepdad ran a sailboat aground in Boston Harbor because I grew up sailing, and it was a spit, rocky spit that was covered with water, but very shallow. And when he sailed it up, it was a boat with a keel, and it hung up, and we couldn't get it off. We tried rocking it, getting out and leaning it over, couldn't do it. And then by the time the tide went out, it was literally laying on its side. Unfortunately, it wasn't super choppy, so it didn't bang, we put cushions underneath it. And then some other dude showed up and dropped anchor. You guys okay? We got to wait for the tide. And so my stepdad rowed out, and they were partying on the boat, and me and my stepbrother were hanging stuck there. And then the tide came in and it still wouldn't come off.
Oh.
And so we had to call the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard ultimately pulled us off. But yeah, we didn't get back into Boston until about 3:00 in the morning.
Oh my God.
Super sketchy. We had a friend with us, Oscar, and he was freaking out. My family, because there's no cell phones or anything. There's no way to get a hold of anybody. He wanted to swim to I think that it was Hull, it's a city in Massachusetts. It's 4 miles away. He's like, dude, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it.
There's a kickboard and a light.
Anyway, let's talk fishing.
Yeah. Well, I am super curious about, the Cape Cod thing.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah.
I've never fished out there, and I would love to go do that at some point. I've it's such a different fishery than anything that I've really experienced, and I've actually never been to the East Coast. Other than Florida and connecting flights through Florida or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, I've never been to the Northeast before. I've been to the Midwest so many times that I've paid my time and that was due for that.
Yeah.
But the Northeast, I've never been there, and I've never fished there, and so I'm really intrigued with the striper thing.
Sure.
And then people talk about bluefish and all this other kind of stuff too. But
false albacore
as well, right? So, we have a lot of people that listen that fish on foot, Puget Sound type of stuff. What are some of the similarities between kind of the Northeast fishery and kind of what some of the saltwater anglers do around here?
So it's super similar in that respect, right? So there's opportunity to target species from the beach and from boat. And there's advantages to both depending on kind of what you're looking for. For me, for game fish, there's a lot of, what I would call forage fish like flounder and black sea bass and stuff that people tend to, want to harvest for, food. But for the sport angler, you're right. It's striped bass, it's bluefish, and it's in the fall, it's false albacore. And it's a New England thing and a mid-Atlantic, all the way down to mid-Atlantic, because it's a migration. So all those fish move, from Maine, coastal Maine. I'll give you some more information, even further north than that, all the way down to the Chesapeake Bay. And super similar, I think, dynamics all the way. I think that kind of low country area, Charleston area. Not as much as far as those species that you see kind of mid-Atlantic and New England, but similar kind of habitat, estuary, marsh grass, that kind of stuff. It's, I didn't grow up fishing. I went to school in Salem, Massachusetts, and once I got into fishing and got into fishing for striped bass, I realized, I learned that there was some of the best striped bass fishing on the New England coast, like literally the places I used to ride my bike by every single day, right? Like, oh my God, really? So, and the interesting thing about striped bass, we can talk striped bass for a minute, is it's one of the great success stories in conservation. The striped bass populations cratered in the I think it would be the 80s, and there was a bunch of moratoriums, and they rebuilt that stock. And fast forward to now, there's another, the stock is declining again. And matter of fact, this week, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Council just instituted a new slot limit for striped bass so they can reduce the recreational landing so they can rebuild the stock by 2029.
Okay, I have a couple quick questions. Yeah. Okay, so numbers dropped off strongly in the 80s, and
terrible.
And was that I'm assuming it was because of sport fishing regulations that were too generous, commercial fishing, and just environmental issues. Or was there any other issues besides those three things?
Yeah, one of the other ones is the decline of the forage fish. So, menhaden, all those fish that live at the lower end of the food chain that striped bass and the entire food chain relies upon, there were issues there as well. But it was, it was classic maximum sustainable harvest mentality. And
right.
There was bad stock recruitment. And
so the bad science they use on the West Coast, they also use on the East Coast, huh?
Yeah, the science, the debates there. I mean, it's always the same thing, right? Oh, there's plenty of fish. And so
let's take as much as we possibly can before we might possibly impact them.
Well, and here's the interesting thing. If you look at, we can talk like last year. So one of the reasons why they just instituted this new narrower slot limit.
Yeah.
The slot limit, I believe, was 28 to 35. One fish per day, I think.
28 inches.
So 35
inches. That's a big fish.
Now it's 28 to 31. They just changed it.
That's still a big fish.
It's still very narrow window.
Yeah.
So above, those bigger fish, above 35, back when it was a 35-inch top end, those bigger fish are the breeders. That big lingcod you caught, same thing, right? Those bigger fish are the fish that are really driving the biomass. So that's a big change. But last year, the recreational take of striped bass was hugely larger than it was the year before. And the biggest mortality for striped bass is recreational angling. So there's the recreational harvest, and then also the mortality, catch and release mortality.
Sure.
And so if you look at the amount of striped bass that are caught and you put let's put a 10% stripe mortality on it, even on a released fish, it's a lot of dead fish. And so that's, it's a conundrum because there is a commercial fishery for striped bass, but really those guys have less of an impact overall than the recreational fishery in terms of numbers.
Okay, so I'm curious to how do they recovered stuff from the 80s?
There was a moratorium, there was really draconian.
So no sport fishing, no commercial fishing.
Yeah, I don't know the exact rules that were, but there was real limits, and there were talks of potential moratoriums now that are to try to get recovery. The stock isn't as bad as it was when they had that collapse.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about striped bass is they're managed by the Atlantic Marine Fisheries Council, so that is state focused, and there's representatives from each state that sit on the council, and they determine the regulations based on science and angler input and those things to put together rules and regulations, which is different. A lot of species, so in state waters, when you get out into the federal waters, the striped bass are managed by the federal government. Those, you cannot harvest striped bass in federal waters. There's no, right? So there's a weird little zone like in Block Island, like just the way the federal and the state waters come together, where there's kind of this like zone where you're relatively close to state water, but you're technically not allowed to take striped bass there because it's technically federal. So there's, a lot of debate about, why aren't striped bass managed under Magnuson-Stevens, which is a federal fisheries policy that really has been incredibly successful restoring stocks. But as you could make the same case for salmon and steelhead, right? They spend most of their time in salt water. Why aren't they managed as a saltwater fish as opposed to the freshwater fish? But that's a really good question. We've been talking about it quite a bit. Like, why isn't Magnuson? So that could be another entire podcast. So the good news is they made a real effort to put in some new regs to rebuild the stock by 2029, which is what the council rules say they had to do. But they've been kicking the can down the road quite a bit. And there was a couple of groups out there, ASGA, the American Saltwater Guides Association, put together a letter and really drove. I mean, I saw the letter, every brand and fly and conventional, hundreds and hundreds of anglers. I mean, they were really, it was really good to see that, they made the right choice. And I'll be out there end of June. I do an annual striper camp. I haven't been for like 3 years because of pandemic, go to my folks' place. And I spend time on the boat with friends. But the other thing I love to do, and this gets back to your initial question, is I love chasing striped bass on the flats on foot. And on the Cape, I'm not super familiar with, the Connecticut and Rhode Island as opportunities there to do that as well. But on the Cape Cod Bay side, which is where my folks are, the largest sand flat in North America is on Cape Cod Bay. And it runs pretty much from Sandwich all the way up to Wellfleet. And it's enormous.
This is super interesting because when the picture that I have in my mind from photos I've seen on fly fishing magazine covers or ads or whatever, striper fishing, these guys on like these rock jetties with like gnarly spiked boots, like with surf crashing, like, and you're like, gosh, the guy's gonna die and he's trying to cast.
There's a lot of that.
That's what I don't think of a big sand flat.
No, Montauk, those surf guys, the guys that love fishing for them in the surf. I mean, that's a surf casting guys. Those guys are, I mean, they're amazing. And there's guys that were doing it, like putting on wetsuits and stuff and really taking it to the extreme. I fished for striped bass off the rocks in Maine before, and it's really good where you've got, crashing surf and fish in there. But there's also, got a good friend that runs a little brand out of Maine called 12 Weight. And he's lives nearby to a place called Higgins Beach. And it is a great place to surf. And so, if it's a surf beach, it's got to be that kind. And it's really great striped bass surf fishing, because it's sand. And the cool thing, and it took me a long time to figure it out at my parents' place. Like I'd go down and you'd wade out and you see them. I mean, they're cruising the flats and literally almost swimming like between your legs. And
wow.
The normal thing was you think, oh, I'm going to throw clouser, bait fish patterns, and you'd kind of strip and you'd catch, I'd catch a schoolie, a couple fish, but you'd watch them swim around the fly and just like, what's going, like what? And it'd be little balls of sand eels. You throw a sand eel and like, no, not even a look, right? Like, what's going on? So there's a guy, his name's Chris Cacorda. I mean, he's on Instagram. He's amazing fly tire. And he is a guide. He's a flats guide on the Cape. He used to work at a retailer there called Goose Hummock. Did 2 retail stores. And I went in, they had this little satellite operation. I went in to talk to Chris and like, hey man, what's going on? I was like, Jesus, I'm fishing the flat. Like, just can't seem to figure it out. He goes, come on out to my car. All right.
And pops the trunk.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. Moves the bag of cocaine out of the way.
Lifts up the raincoat. Yeah. And so I got. So he opens it up and he has this fly, and he called it the crispy critter. And he goes, here, take a couple of these. So I'm like, okay. So I go down to the flats, do my thing, and I'm having a frustrating morning. The sun's coming up. It's beautiful, right? It's beautiful, warm water. And there's fish all over the place, and I can't get them to do anything. And so I go, I got that crispy critter fly, And so I tie it on, and I'm kind of pissed, right? Because I'm just like, God damn it. And tie it on, I cast out, I'm like kind of looking, and I'm not like really paying attention. I just cast it out. I'm like, Jesus, another day.
You're describing how I usually fish.
And literally the rod almost gets ripped out of my hand.
Oh, nice.
It's like, what? Whoa. And I'm like, awesome. And it was a nice fish. I'm like, okay, wow. It's like, well, that worked. Let's try it again. So, and I don't know if I didn't move it the second time, but I think I may have like just little bitty twitches, and same thing. And like for an hour, I had just lights out.
Wow.
Striped bass. Like, it was incredible. And what I soon realized was that they're not eating sand eels. They're not eating bait fish. They're hoovering up crabs off the bottom is what they're doing on those flats.
Yeah. So are you fishing like a sinking line?
So it's really funny, right? So that was the same thing. I always fished intermediate. I went into there was another Black Eel Outfitters. They're closed now. But I went in there and I was like, man, it was great. He's like, dude, you got to fish full sink because you want it laying on the bottom. Because they'll even spook the line, even the intermediate line coming up off the bottom, spook them. Okay. So I do fish a full sinking line.
Yeah.
I do.
And you don't have to worry about getting hung up because it's just sand.
Yeah, it's perfect. And what's super cool is that, I circle back to Chris, I could used up them all, and I had some friends tie them up. And I was like, dude, can you remind me of that pattern? He goes, I don't fish that anymore. He only fishes true crab patterns, right? This thing looks like it's a really interesting. It could be a worm. It could be a little crab. He's like, yeah, when fish are hungry, they'll eat it. It doesn't matter. They'll eat anything. But it's really all about crab patterns. Like you could fish a Flexico crab for striped bass, for sure. Absolutely.
So I just need to buy a plane ticket and bring my permit box, and I'm good.
Pretty much. Yeah, it's super cool. And it's really like what also took a little bit of time. Like I have my spots, where I like to be. I know, there's a lot of sandbars that kind of run not only parallel to the beach but out from the beach.
Yeah.
So when you see that at low tide, so I like
fish kind of come through the trough.
They do, and you're looking for incoming. I like to fish the incoming tide mostly. There was a guy, the last time I fished there, I was there for the Cheeky Schoolie tournament. I think it was last year, actually. So that was the last time I fished a little bit. And there was a guy there, and he's like, sees us. There's a bunch of us there because like Sasha from Keep Fish Wet, a bunch of other folks were all fishing that beach. As a matter of fact, the Cheeky Schoolie winners came out of my parents' beach. And so he comes by, he goes, showing everybody my spot, right? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm looking at his fly, and he's got like literally, it's like a little round crab body with nothing else, like no arms, nothing. And I'm like, what? And so it's a mini flounder, it's a crab, it's a bunch of like, they'll eat little flounder. So, and we got into the debate, then we go, okay, so he's stripping or like sitting or whatever. He was a stripper, but I just like barely move it and it works. Okay. So super fun. And then of course in the boat, the Bayside and the Cape Cod, Vineyard Sound, which is on the, so if you look at the arm like this, my parents are right here. And that sand flat runs from basically here all the way to here. But there's all these estuaries that come in. Like you can't walk the whole thing, but I've probably got 3 miles of sand flat.
Wow.
And what I really like doing too is there's the creeks that come in. So there are tidal creeks, Quivet Creek, Paynes Creek. Those are really good places to fish as well because the bait flushes out and, there's usually a little wave break out there and you'll always see a bunch of guys standing there. The one thing I would say about fishing the flats is it can be really dangerous. And the reason, if you don't know, and where I fish is not too bad because I'm familiar with it and I don't get myself in positions where the tide can come in because you can walk out like way out.
Okay.
And when that tide comes in, it comes in behind you. And if you're not careful, you can get stuck out there. My beach, not so much. The Paynes Creek one, it can be tricky. And that's why it's helpful, to sometimes go with a guide or be in a place and be super careful watching the tide and where it comes in. But and then the other side, boat fishing on the bay side is really cool. You get blitzes and bait and striped bass. What's really cool on the Vineyard Sound side is it's relatively shallow water in places. There's rips out there. And so when that tide is running, I mean, the rips, like you're going from, depths to, feet deep. And so you get really good wave action. And what you'll do is you'll set the boat up, just above, and you cast big sink line, big squid flies, and just swing it in and strip out. And it's super fun and big fish out there in that. Yeah. So that's fun. And then off of like Monomoy. So Monomoy kind of tails off of the elbow here. I fished the backside of Monomoy, and you think you were in the Bahamas. Those kind of flats. And it's all visual. Lots of bluefish there too. The blue fishing hasn't been as good as it had been. I think they've rebounded quite a bit. Normally when you're fishing that kind of shallow, flat stuff and you see a cruising fish coming by, you can tell what's a striped bass and what's a bluefish based on where they are in the water column.
Okay.
Bluefish tend to hold up a little bit higher and striped bass tend to be a little bit lower. I think they're working that bottom more, where bluefish are kind of, yellow-eyed devils, man. They'll hit anything. Probably arguably one of the most underrated game fish out there. I'm not sure why, but they are, they fight like crazy. They have different designations based on their size. I think it's, gator bluefish, which is a big one, and they will they call it gator. They will put a major bend in your rod.
Wow.
And what we do oftentimes is when there's bluefish around and blitzing, what you do is you've got a light tackle rod with a bear plug.
Sure.
And you tease them in and throw your fly.
And they're toothy critters too, right?
Yeah, you got to run wire.
Yeah,
sure.
So have you done any striper fishing either in like California,
I have.
Delta?
Yep, I have.
Oh, you have? Okay.
In the Delta.
Yeah. And how does it compare?
It's
Totally different game.
Totally different game. And, the thing, and that's the Delta. I mean, it's a completely somewhat artificial place, right?
Right.
It's super fun, and they fight kind of like striped bass, but it wasn't the same vibe for sure.
Okay.
The striped bass and freshwater, right? And
yeah. Well, I was also going to ask about, if you have fish for them in reservoirs. I mean, like even down Arizona, right? I mean, there's like,
striped bass or wipers, or they have the cross. The thing about, people often ask, like, well, if you had one day left, like, and you were going to fish anywhere, what would you go after, right? And for me, it's striped bass, and there's a lot of reasons why. When it's home and family and all of that, striped bass, they're super strong. They don't do, it's like redfish, right? They'll chase a popper, at the right time, but they don't jump, right? They're not, it's not an acrobatic fish. It's a really strong fish. And, but it's the whole experience. You get done, you go to, the Sesowit, marina, and you have a lobster roll and an Narragansett when you're done. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, it's that.
I'm sold.
Yeah, it's that whole thing. And so that's, and June, May, June, really good, early July for striped bass. When the heat of the summer comes, changes up a little bit different game. And then in the fall, false albacore up there, that is really, really fun. It's it's a lot of, you see them come in, it's a lot of people run and gun, but they're little tuna.
And with that, that's primarily boat fishing though, right?
You can get them from the beach.
Really?
Yeah. Vineyard's a real popular spot. I mean, you have the Vineyard, Martha's Vineyard Striper Derby, which is, stripers, bluefish, false albacore, and, what's the other fish it's not a false albacore, it's another little tuna. I can't remember what it's called now. It escapes me at the moment. But
like skipjack?
Yeah, it's similar to that. It'll come to me in a minute.
Okay, Bonita.
Yeah. but they catch them like huge beach thing there.
Very cool.
And you'll get false albacore running the beach. What's cool about, you know, you can fish for false albacore, you know, Harker's down in Carolina is a big, you know, false albacore place. A little bit different game. The water temperature needs to hit a certain temperature on the Cape for them to kind of move in. And when they do, they're around. And what's cool is you catch them in places where they run, right? It's not deep. So they don't, you know, my experience with deeper, you know, false albies, you know, they'll kind of circle the boat and then they sound. Whereas when you catch them on flats in shallow water,
Yeah, they just go.
They go, and they are really strong and super fun. You know, the interesting thing is, again, I mentioned the ASGA. Those guys, you know, there's no real management of false albacore. They don't, you know, there's a lot of trips for them. It's not really a fish that you eat. I think it can be prepared in a way that you can eat it, but, you know, the joke is if you want to eat a false albacore, you know, get a cedar plank, put it on the barbecue, and then throw out the fish and eat the plank. Right. So they're not super tasty. So it's really a recreational fish primarily. But, you know, they don't know if the fish I caught off of, you know, Chatham is the same fish that's popping up down in, you know, off of Harker's. You know, they've got tons of false albacore in Florida and the Gulf. I mean, they're really considered more or less a trash fish down there. So, yeah, it's really, really fun. And back to bluefish, one thing too, the other thing people say bluefish is, you know, not very good eating. Yeah, that's not true. It's really, you know, there's a recipe for anybody out there that you can look it up. It's called a Montauk burger. You know, Field and Stream did it years ago. And it's like fresh bluefish, has to be fresh. You literally kind of make a fish cake out of it with, you know, Old Bay seasoning and some saltines and a little bit of mayonnaise, hold it all together, you grill it. It's the best thing you've ever had. It's like incredibly good. But it's like, you know, any kind of fish that, you know, is kind of dark and oily, you gotta bleed it out.
As good as the sandwich I made for you today? That good?
That albacore with that sandwich was super good. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, New England, it's super special. And, you know, the Cheeky tournament's coming up here in a couple of weeks, which is, I think, arguably the largest fly fishing tournament in the world.
Really?
They're going to have a couple hundred anglers and have a big event and everybody gets together. And it's called the Schoolie tournament because normally, what's interesting at this time of the year, generally, most of what's around is just smaller fish, right? The big fish move in as the wet water warms. There's a regional magazine called On the Water, and they put out a YouTube video that shows the migration. So it's like, hey, here's where the 40-inch fish are showing up. Here's where, and it maps the whole thing all the way up. And but the bigger fish are coming earlier and earlier, and that's a function of climate change. And what's interesting about that is we have a good friend, Kyle Schaefer, who runs Soulfly. He guides out of Maine, flats boat out of Maine. He also owns a lodge in the Berry Islands of the Bahamas called Soulfly Lodge there. He is actually setting up a flats guiding operation for striped bass in Newfoundland.
Huh.
Because of warming water, those fish are migrating further and further north.
Is their spawn timing, is that changing as well? Or just distribution?
I think it's more distribution.
Yeah.
You know, the interesting thing, there was a big blow up about, you know, a lot of people were really concerned in those Atlantic salmon rivers where you're starting to see a lot more striped bass and predation on Atlantic salmon. That seems to have died down quite a bit.
Yeah.
They had the same issue, you know, people were blaming striped bass for the decline of salmon in the Delta because those fish are clearly foraging on, you know, smaller fish. But,
yeah.
You know, I think those fish have kind of always been up there. There's always been striped bass kind of up in the St. Lawrence, but there's definitely a change happening in that respect. Like I was talking to, I mean, you know, you've seen tarpon being caught off of docks in North Carolina, you know, Chesapeake Bay areas becoming a really robust red fishery all of a sudden, you know?
Mm.
So yeah, that's just shifting stocks because water's getting warmer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we make the joke around here that maybe we'll have like yellowfin tuna in Puget Sound someday or something.
Yeah, I've always wondered why we don't have, we talked about this earlier today before we got on the pod. It was like, why don't we have striped bass here?
Yeah. I would love to, if there's anyone out there that would, maybe a biologist or something like that. If you have any idea of why there's not more stripers, because the water temps are favorable.
I don't know if it gets warm enough. I don't know if it gets warm enough in the summer period, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because those fish all leave. I mean, a few holdover fish, even in Maine and the rivers, but generally they go in. It's not, those fish migrate. They go down with the water. So my hunch is it's probably the water's just too cold year round. Yeah, especially offshore here. Right?
Well, the offshore temp, yeah,
super cold, right?
Yeah,
but they get fish off of California. No. People fish for stripers on the beach down in the Bay Area.
Oh, tons. I was talking with an individual on our recent trip down to Hobosh, and gosh, where does he live? Maybe like Santa Cruz area or something like that. And he catches tons of stripers.
Yeah.
On the fly.
Yeah.
Like, not anything giant, but like,
yeah,
that's like nice fish, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm really intrigued by stripers. I think I've talked about that in one of our vlogs recently because I had a couple people mention it. But I've only caught them on gear before. I've never caught one on the fly, so it's on the list of stuff I want to catch.
Yeah, it's really fun. I mean, I'm leaving for Florida on Tuesday, and I have an old guy that started fishing with on the Cape. He guided me. His name's Warren Marshall. He was an Orvis guy for a long time, and I had another guy that I fished with, and he couldn't guide me, and so he hooked me up with Warren, and I fished with Warren ever since. And Warren actually has a place down, I think, in Little Torch in the Keys, and he's down there right now. So, and I haven't been down and done the Florida tarpon thing. He's always told me to come down. So I'm going to go down. I'm staying with another friend and I'll see him down there. But, it's I fish with Warren. There's a, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute there in, I think it's outside of Falmouth or Chatham. I can't remember. It's the big place. And there's a really great little rip to fish there. And you're fishing squid at that time of the year. And like you'll see squid like literally jumping out of the water, and you see the striped bass like coming up, and it's super fun. Yeah.
So I mean, presentation wise with stripers, what's kind of like the overlap with cutthroat fishing? Like like fishing cutthroat, like how has striper fishing?
It's the same.
Yeah,
same dynamic, varying retrieves. Some people do the two-handed thing. I never do that. False albacore, same thing. Sometimes you need to get that fly moving really, really fast. But I always found that, single-handed stripping is fine. But, if you're fishing, when you're throwing those, fishing that blue water, squid or big clousers or whatever, it's classic. Boom, boom, boom. It's just way.
I guess one of the differences I would assume would be that you probably catch stripers in more variety of water depth than cutthroat, since cutthroat are so shoreline oriented.
For sure.
That would probably be one of the.
Yeah, and I think we were trying to figure that out. Like we would go out and fishing on the boat on the bay side. There's a shoal off of Wellfleet called Billingsgate Shoal, and it extends out, and it's kind of part of that whole flat system. And you go out, and there's boom, they're all over. Like you cast into a bunch of blitzing fish, and just you're catching them on. If you're not catching one on a cast, you're like, what? Like, it's kind of fun. But then it'll just stop. Right? It just dies out. So then what do? You head to the flats and start looking for cruising fish. And so the theory is that those fish are kind of, they're out there hitting the bait, gorging themselves, and then they kind of just cruise the flats, timing-wise, when they're in there, when they're not. But so, yeah, it's all. Then you catch them in rivers. Like I went on a striper trip and fished the Kennebec River and caught a bunch of striped bass in there. That's the one thing about, I think, they talk about striped bass as being kind of the working man's fish in some respect. You can catch them in all different kinds of places. You can catch them in rivers, you can catch them in estuaries, you catch them in deep water, you catch them on the flats. It's probably, you think about it, fishing from Boston, Maine and Newfoundland now all the way down to the mid-Atlantic. I mean, it's a massive fishery.
It is. Right? Well, cutthroat would be a larger fishery, except that so much of it is inaccessible.
True.
Right? Puget Sound cutthroat, it's not that's not the extent of their range.
Exactly. Yeah, if you look at it, it's probably one of the largest anadromous fish runs out there when you consider it. Like if you look at pure numbers, right?
Yeah.
from here all the way up to Alaska.
I've never heard of anyone like going to Southeast Alaska for,
I know
go fish for cutthroat.
and people do it in BC though.
Yeah, on the island.
I've seen really big cutty caught on the island.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
But I've always been curious about that. About are people fishing? I mean, what I should do is I should reach out to David, who used to work for us and is now up on Prince of Wales Island, and he's guiding up there. And,
sure.
And just kind of pick his brain, and but I think about that. I'm like, but what I love cutthroat, but I don't know if I would travel
to fish
to go fish for cutthroat. I mean, yeah, and maybe they're a little bit bigger.
Maybe there's some cutthroat with some potential steelhead bycatch potentially, but that might work. What's interesting, one thing about striped bass though is the flatwing fly.
Yeah,
that's a really effective. The flatwings are very effective for striped bass.
Flatwings are very effective for cutthroats, and I tied up a couple that I want to give you before we leave because they got some really cool ones that I've been working on.
Yeah,
probably I'm guessing there'll be a feature in the bins at the shop in the future, but there's still some process to be done with those. But so speaking of cutthroat, you love the cutthroat fish, and you've told me before that that in Washington at least that cutthroat might be your favorite.
I think it is. It's something about there's something about it where it's so accessible, and when you get to do it frequently enough, it like really fulfills that that itch. And there's a lot of different ways to catch them too. And those times when it's visual and clear water, and it's super fun. And when it's not, it's always kind of a treasure hunt, right? You're looking and changing things up. Yeah. And they're just, there's something about them, right? They're just super feisty, and they're just, inch for inch. They've got to be some of the toughest little fish out there, right?
Right.
And,
right.
So yeah, I love it.
We've gone out and kayak fish a few times for them. Yep. And, but I think when you typically fish for them, you're usually boat fishing.
Yeah. A couple of friends with boats, and
that's the best way to.
It's so
Yeah, I've been friends with boats.
The best kind of bait. Yeah, we've been known to, people like look at the Instagram feeds like, do you guys fish or just drink the whole time, right? So, Earl Harper.
Can't it be both?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, it's a cigar, usually a cigar involved, and micheladas in the morning, and super fun. It's just, that's part of it, right? The fishing is almost secondary in some cases, right? But yeah, and then Rich Sims, who well, one of the founders of the Wild Steelhead Coalition, and he's got a really sweet Montauk whaler that we get to get out in, and it's the really perfect sound boat for that kind of stuff. Yeah, and Captain Keith, and the other thing about Seamer cutthroat fishing, I was like, here we are telling people how great it is. It's like it's not. Generally, you can go out there and you might not see another person fishing for them, right, at all. Although the last time I went out, fished the beach, I walked down. It was just where the power lines are. I can't remember where it is, over near Cason. Like there, I walked down and
that Victor.
Yeah, and there's Leland.
Yeah,
I'm like, dude,
was he fishing?
Yeah, no, he was just standing there, like looking. And
I've seen him several times on the beach, and I've never seen him.
Yeah, he's taking a nap or having a cigar.
Yeah, or drinking scotch. Yeah, I got a lot of. I'll smell the cigar before I see him, or I'll be like, oh. Somebody's taking a nap on the log over there. Oh, that's Leland.
Hey, Leland, how long you been here? And he pulls up his guy, goes, about that long? Yeah, she's good, man. Yeah, we sat there and watched fish rising, like slashing and stuff, but well out of casting range.
Yeah.
So, I'm looking forward to pinks this fall. That'll be this summer.
I saw a report saying that there looked to be a little bit more than 4 million fish estimated.
That should be enough.
So, so in reality, it means that it's probably going to be anywhere between 1 million and 8 million.
Right.
Anywhere there. So
you'll be able to get them out in Nia Bay probably coming in.
Yeah, we
right?
Yeah, we did a Nia Bay trip 2 years ago, and that would have been a pink year.
Yep.
And I don't think we I'm trying to remember. I don't think we caught any pinks that year out there. We caught some coho, but not many.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the coho last year.
Oh, that was fun, man.
My goodness.
Super fun. Well, you had that epic August.
Yeah, an August trip.
Last year in August, I went on the September trip, and we still got a couple.
So many, but those September fish were just
spectacular.
They were strong.
That little cove there, that wave rolling in, cruising through there. That was we talked about this earlier, like the experience of Pacific Northwest and how lucky we are here.
Right.
That place is like the end of the earth, right?
Yeah.
Like it,
if you haven't done the drive, you got to do this drive where you out past CQ, you go west. So this is Olympic Peninsula, the top of the north side of the peninsula. So you're like looking across the water at Vancouver Island. So if you know where Port Angeles is, to the west of that, you can drive out the coast. And once you get past CQ, you start the road kind of curves back towards the coastline, and you just go along the beach for miles and miles and miles, all the way out to Nia Bay, to the Indian reservation that's out there. And it is spectacular. There's so many little places you can pull off. And, we were talking about this, my family, having the place out in Forks now, we're like, if it's not rented out, let's drive up there and let's just go look for whales, because it doesn't take long. You see them. No,
it's crazy. When we did that trip in September, we were rolling the kayaks down to the put in, and there was like 3 whales, like 50 yards offshore, maybe right there. Yeah. I was like, oh, whoa.
Yeah. No, that was super cool. I wish I had stuck a GoPro in the water but I didn't want it because I was too scared to. I don't even want to know what's down there, right? So I was showing Brian a video that one of our guides, Aaron, filmed 2 months ago, where a juvenile orca came like right at them and came up. They don't even know it was coming. It just surfaced. They saw it, but then it came up literally at them, 30 feet away,
maybe.
And then it like goes under the kayaks, and they see its eye as it turns and goes.
TikTok, man.
It'd be super cool to experience, I think.
Yeah, as long as they don't. Yeah, they know you're there. They're not going to come up underneath you, probably. But never know.
You never know.
All right.
Okay. Well, Brian's got to hit the road. But thanks for joining us on this episode of the Gig Harbor Flycast. We'll link to Brian's stuff down below. You should follow on Instagram and YouTube, and check out his website, Moldy Chum. Recently, for May the 4th, for Star Wars Day, Brian had the funniest Instagram posts ever. You got to check those things out. It's great. Thanks a lot, Brian. We'll have you back again.
Yeah, we'll do it. I love it. Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.